Everybody take his birthday and his mother work, but then my internal. This is the rule of life. If someone dies into a mental body, someone will get lower body. This might be solid body, suffer body, and even animal species. In the environment of Hajjana will get very small body. In the environment of Sakwabana, he will be under what game? Free from evil of birth and death. It's called religion or moksha. Next slide, please. So I will talk about the medical issue, which is very popular issue in the medical science, medical science, because the aspect of life which is associated with human life, healthcare, and human religion is biomedical ethics. Biomedical ethics comes from because some development of genetic ecology, which is related by scientists, will create a life of the process of neural fertilization. Biotechnology, the organ, international hormones, sperm, and embryology tissue will impact various bioethical problems. This is like atom, God, and impact degradation of killing machine. Biology and medicine are science, but they are more science that deal with living being or atma or soul. The direct effect of human being and another living space is a very practical and powerful problem. The main issue of medical ethics, that's like this. It's like about the abortion, things like this. Next slide. Yeah. This is the main issue of the biomedical ethics. Abortion, yeah, this is the determination of pregnancy, the death and embryo of fetus. With this step, death of life is sacred. To be loved and deliver practice ahimsa, non-violence. Hindu practice non-violence is connected to rape and reincarnation. The repeated rape evolution to different species of life. Next slide. The second issue now is human cloning. Human cloning is being defined as a asexual modification of individual human being as assistance and development. Human being, cell, protein, and tissue are often deployed for biological and biomedical research. Cloning is genetically spiritually different because different soul and spirit karma. Some sastra and other religions advocate of human cloning with some lessons as cloning involves destroying embryo, cloning make human in man image not gods. Cloning changes human society would mean fairness people full of solid methods. Some of us don't know the important and then controversy as human beings. Earlier conversation started in the late. Thank you very much.
I want to pick up on the theme I started yesterday to, I would contend, all religious faiths. I think it's a real challenge. I think it's a challenge that can be addressed, but to date has only partially been addressed. In fact, we heard much this morning some criticisms of neo-Darwinism. So if I could have the next slide, please. Just to remind you, I'm contending that the answer to this question as to why there is a continuing controversy over creation and evolution, over life and its origin, is because, next slide please, there is an unresolved paradigm conflict between theology and science that arises from what I call universal Darwinism. And I should point out I did not make up that term. I believe it comes from Richard Dawkins. The terminology I've been using is teleology versus ekpatology. And I already said last time that the ekbatic refers to necessary processes. Teleology, next slide please, is something, keep clicking, that affects, I would contend, all religious faiths. For example, if you look at the Tao Te Ching, it says lumps of clay are shaped into a vessel. From their non-being arises the functions of the vessel. There's a notion of function or purpose. From the Jewish scriptures, that Abram fell on his face, and God said to him, "My covenant is with you. You shall be the father of a multitude of nations." Genesis 17, very deeply riddled with God's purpose for Abram and the Israelite people. If we look at the Bhaktivedanta, a person free from all attachment and diversion and able to control his senses through regulated principles of freedom can obtain the complete mercy of the Lord. If you regulate, you can obtain mercy. There is a goal-directedness or a purpose here. From the Surah, Alice said, "Choose not two gods. There is only one God. So me only, be in awe." Okay, Alice said, choose. You have a choice. Do you want A? Do you want B? There's the notion of purpose. From the Christian gospel, the hour is coming when true worshipers will worship the Father in spirit and in truth. For such the Father seeks to worship Him. We have the picture of God seeking people to draw them closer to God's love. Again, goal-directedness. I challenge anyone in this audience to find me a religious faith that does not have a concept of purpose. I contend there are none. Next, please. So that's what I mean by teleology, expressed differently perhaps in different faiths, but I would contend the key ingredient of a religious perspective on the world. Next. So universal Darwinism, just to remind you, keep clicking please, has replication. Namely, there are identifiable things like people or Paramecia or platypus or spiders or geraniums, that copy themselves. It has variation, namely the copying is imperfect. Each copy differs for whatever reason slightly from its replicated parent. And finally, selection, namely the efficiency of a given replicator to copy itself depends on its surrounding environment. When you add those up together, you get, next please, you get evolution, and that is the idea of universal Darwinism. Note that I have not made any reference to a life form. Next please. You have differential, the idea of universal Darwinism is that differential copying, differential reproduction, and survival yield apparently designed structures. Next. So theology's greatest challenge, as I said yesterday, is next. You have imperfect replicators put in some kind of environment. If you wait long enough, universal Darwinism says you will get structure without purpose. You will have self-organization, but nobody decided it in advance. There's nobody planning. That's the idea. In other words, there is no blunt and extreme as I can be here to highlight the paradigm conflict. I did say to you, I'm optimistic enough to believe it is a resolvable conflict, but I don't think it has yet been fully resolved. Next, please. So, universal Darwinism is not only confined to biology, and that is my point today. God and the new biology is the theme of this session. Well, it's not just biology. It's biology plus, next please, sociology, cosmology, and psychology. And I'll briefly sketch these out, although yesterday I discussed cosmology in detail. So, next please. If we go to biology, we've discovered a lot in the last 50 years. We've discovered that there is a blueprint molecule for all known forms of life, and it's the DNA molecule. And it gives rise to fungus and carrots and praying mantis and moose and grass and all kinds of things. But the key question that Darwinism leaves us here with, and we heard this addressed earlier today, if God did it through evolution, what exactly does God do? And this is part of the challenge. It's easy to say evolution is God's mechanism. It's somewhat more difficult to be explicit about how God is making use of that mechanism. Where is the purpose? Where is the teleology? Next, please. So life's replicator, next please, is DNA. And the way it works, basically, is that DNA is copied or transcribed, if you like, to RNA, which in turn makes proteins, which in turn makes the organism. Very roughly speaking, this is how it works. And I put this in here to emphasize that DNA is not a magical thing that snaps a molecular finger and out comes life. While this is something I think to be in awe of, it's also a mechanism that is being unraveled by scientists all over the world. And this is the basic structure. So, a gene is a segment of DNA. It's a particular chunk or piece of DNA that encodes a particular protein. So it's a long string of molecules, and this part might encode hemoglobin, and this part might encode something else. And modern evolution understands the genes to be the replicants. They are the reproducing items. It's not the species. It's not even individual organisms such as ourselves. It is our genes, and each gene is a little thing that copies itself through this process. Differential genetic reproduction and survival form the underlying explanation for all known life according to the Darwinian paradigm. It's the genes that are self-replicating. Next, please. So why do people believe this? Well, first of all, there's a fossil record. We see failed replicators in the fossil record, such as trilobites. We see full bodies of extinct animals, such as the mammoth, that are similar to modern ones, like the elephant. So here are two examples of failed replicators of a set of genes that formed what we would call a mammoth, but after a while died out. Third, we see similarities and adaptations between different species. So we have, for example, a gull and a pelican, and while they look different, the pelican has a big beak, the gull has a little one, for example, they are similar in many ways. They both have webbed feet, they both have water-resistant bodies that keep themselves warm. They live in a similar environment, and so they have a lot of similar things. And fourth, the theory can be tested with experiment, and to the extent it has been tested, there is agreement. Now, one might say, wait a minute, nobody's gone back 60 million or 80 million years and looked for and found living dinosaurs. Well, that is correct. But there is an example of an experiment with guppies in South America, where a population of guppies was taken in a certain region, and somebody captured some of them and put it in a region 11 kilometers away upstream. And after about a decade, these two populations of guppies were no longer able to interbreed with one another. Now that's an example of evolution at a small scale. The guppies in one region had a different survival, a different environment they had to survive in than in the other region. And after a while, they had to adapt to survive, and that adaptation prevented them from reproducing with one another. So that is an example of how it's demonstrated. There are examples with fruit flies, with bacteria, and so on. Next, please. So the big problem we're presented with is that universal Darwinism implies that all life forms arise from differential reproduction and survival of genes. And the challenge is, what is God's role in creating life? So for theistic evolutionists, if God does it, well, okay, does what exactly? Next, please. Sociobiology. This idea was formed by Ed Wilson in 1976. The basic idea is that altruism, morality, doing good, is the result of an evolutionary process. First of all, the definition. Reciprocal altruism is the notion that different species, or perhaps different organisms within the same species, mutually come to the aid and benefit of one another. Next, please. For example, ants, there's one falling across the screen, and aphids. So, if you can see that slide, aphids are the little green things, and the ants basically treat the aphids the way people deal with cows. The aphids are able to secrete juices from the plants, and the ants use them. So the ants take care of the aphids and help them, and the aphids indirectly take care of the ants. So each one is helping the other survive. That's reciprocal altruism. Next, please. So kin selection is another concept. Social insects reproduce more efficiently by raising fertile siblings instead of fertile offspring. This was a finding demonstrated in a famous paper by Hamilton in 1964, where people wondered, well, how come ants and bees and termites, next please, how come ants and bees and termites reproduce not by having lots of children, but by having one mother that makes many brothers, that makes many sisters and some brothers? Well, let's look at a comparison. If you look at animals, we have a mother, like animals, like us. There's a mother and a father, and the children share 50% of the mom's genes and 50% of the dad's genes. So the parents have a 50-50 genetic investment in the child. 50% of the parents' genes. They each share 50% of each other's genes, if you just do the math. If I get half my genes from my dad and my mom, and my brother or sister gets half, and the half conferred are random, then I've got a 50-50 chance of getting the same genes as a brother or sister. So I've got a 50% in genetic investment in a brother or sister. But let's look at hymenoptera, things like ants, bees, wasps, termites, and even, as was discovered in the late 1990s, naked mole rats. This is the first example of a mammal that has this kind of reproductive character. So, in those guys, the mothers, have twice as many genes as the fathers. So this produces a genetic imbalance in the children. Next, please. The daughters have 50% of the mother's genes, but because the father contributes only half, they have 75% of the sister's genes, exemplified by the different colors there. 1/4 pink, 3/4 gray. So in other words, the daughters are more closely related to each other than they are to their mothers, and vice versa. The sons have 50% of the mother's genes and 100% of their brother's genes, because they only have half the amount. So what this means is that the genes of the daughters are more likely to survive if daughters keep daughters alive. In other words, it's genetically more successful for them not to have babies. It's genetically more successful to keep brother and sister alive. Now, of course, if it happened for 100% of the organisms, eventually they would all die. So the natural end point of this is that one person gets to be the mom. That's the queen bee, for example, or the queen ant. All the rest get to be part of the happy family. And this was observed to happen even in naked mole rats, where there is one mole rat, this little animal that lives underneath the Sahara Desert. It's about yay big, and it's a mammal. One of them, in a mole rat colony, has all the babies, and all the rest take care of the mole rat colony. Next, please. So basically, it's better to care for sisters than it is to have daughters. So this is an example of the power of genetic selection. What has this got to do with morals, you might ask? Next, please. Well, here's an example of how you can apply these ideas to notions of peace and violence, something important to the Mennonite church that I go to. Peaceful and violent organisms will coexist in a manner that maximizes their reproduction. Next, please. So let's consider hawks and hawks versus doves. Now, hawks symbolize either animals or people that are aggressive and tend to be violent. If they want something, they just go out and take it and just don't get in their way. Doves are peaceful. They don't want to fight. They want to get along with other people. Okay, next please. So, suppose you had a population that was 100% peaceful. Wouldn't it be nice? Well, there would be no fights. It would be, however, if there's evolution of a dove into a hawk, in other words, if the peaceful family ever has a baby that's sort of an aggressive black sheep, it's going to be very easy for the hawks to barge in, gain more food, and the hawks will have hawk babies. So the violent group will just find in the 100% dove population it will be easier to have more aggressive, more violent offspring. This is unstable. What if we had 100% hawks? Well, there would be lots of fights, right? Because two hawks coming together are going to clash. It will slow down reproduction. It's difficult to reproduce when you're fighting somebody. It's easy. Suppose now the hawks had a baby dove. Well, the dove would be clobbered in a fight. But it would hide. It would let everybody else fight, and when nobody's looking, it will steal food. And if it can find another dove to mate with, it'll have more baby doves. And eventually, this will be unstable. Next, please. What you can show is that the stable arrangement is one where doves and hawks coexist in some kind of population ratio that basically doesn't change very much. If you have too much one way, it will tilt back to the other. This is called an evolutionary stable strategy. Next, please. Next. So this is a course of action taken by organisms because no other course of action will benefit the organisms more, by which I mean cause them to reproduce more in the environment in which they find themselves. Next, please. So this is where sociobiology comes in. The claim is that human altruism, morality, things like doing good, being kind, being nice, being generous, they are entirely explained by kin selection and reciprocal altruism. In other words, we don't do these things because some transcendent God told us or because some inner consciousness drives us. We are this way because evolution created populations that act like this. And had they not, there would be far fewer of us to sit here peacefully and listen to this discussion. We'd all probably take up swords and fight each other. So the idea, Wilson's idea, is that morality itself is an evolutionary stable strategy, and this is where it begins to become religiously uncomfortable. As with all other human characteristics, the argument says that morals are the result of a Darwinian process of reproduction and survival and have things like, as I said, love and happiness and gift-giving and generosity. It's all undirected, purposeless evolution. So goes the flame. Next, please. Well, is there evidence for this? It's easy to say this. Well, there is partial evidence. Consider infanticide. Daly and Wilson showed that a persistent and steady murder of children, they studied homicide figures that showed that fathers persistently and steadily murdered their own children. This looks like it contradicts Darwinian evolution. You're killing off your own genes. But when they studied this, a set of Canadian infanticides from 1974 to 1983, they classified them according to biological parents and step-parents, non-biological fathers and biological ones. Guess which ones did more killing? Show the graph, please. They discovered that the graph on the left is what you get if the fathers are biologically related. In other words, there's almost no infanticide. Look at the infanticide rate if they are step-parents. It's enormous, especially for young children. Not surprising. Young children require a lot of resources, a lot of attention from the mother. If you're upset with the kid, it's not your own. From an evolutionary perspective, you're better to kill that kid off and mate with the mother so your own genes are getting propagated and you're spending your own energy taking care of your own. A very depressing conclusion, but this is what they found. Wilson would say, sociobiology. Next, please. So what place is there for a transcendent morality? Now, I've only got 5 minutes, so I'm going to go through this quickly. In cosmology, next, please, we explored yesterday the idea of universal Darwinism, and that we have the basic idea that complex, life-permitting structures in our universe arise from an evolutionary selection of universes within a multiverse. Next, please. And here the idea was that black holes, keep clicking, generate quantum bursts of baby universes, and the most fertile universe is the one that maximizes the constant, that has constants of nature that maximize the production of black holes. Keep going. So the idea is that if this hypothesis about baby universes and changing constants is correct, we will live in a universe that maximizes black hole production, and this can be tested. Next, please. So the idea is that the replicators here are the universes, the genes that reproduce are the constants of nature, and the selection is in the environment of the multiverse. So you have a universal Darwinism here. And the question, of course, is what place is there for a superintelligence that selects the laws of physics? It's all purposeless. Next, please. Finally, psychology. This is an idea promoted by Susan Blackmore about 6 years ago. The basic idea is that the brain itself is the ultimate copying machine. Thought itself is the result of a Darwinian competition amongst nerve impulses. You're not even really thinking when you listen to me. Maybe you're not. What you are doing is simply experiencing the competition amongst your neural impulses that are giving rise to sensations that we would call thought. Even thought, according to universal Darwinism, is just the result of an evolutionary competition. She calls this mimetic evolution, that the basic unit of mental information is called a mean, and it's capable of replication. A mean is to thought what a gene is to life. So, for example, who recognizes that? It's Beethoven's Fifth. That is an example of a thought mean that everybody has copied. We've all heard it. It's copied into here. We remember it. I'm almost done. A meanplex is a collection of means that form a recognizable pattern, like a clown. And keep clicking, please, because we're almost out of time. And the replication comes when the brain, my brain, imitates the means of someone else's The variation is that I don't quite copy correctly, and the replication is that some memes are more easily remembered than others. So mimetic altruism comes about not because of sociobiology. Consider Sally. Okay, softly, she's friendly, she helps others, she's thoughtful. Consider Fred. He's lazy, withdrawn, he's selfish. Well, Sally is going to have lots of friends that cause her to interact more. Sally's friendly, helpful memes will be copied because she has lots of pals. But Fred, we won't see lots of withdrawn, lazy people because they never meet many people. So the memes for laziness and withdrawnness don't get copied. Okay, I'm basically pretty much finished here. Keep going. So the proposal is that, keep going, in the line of human evolution, we have human development as the result of mean-gene coevolution. Keep going. Our ideas of thriftiness, creativity, our positive attitudes are simply the result of mimetic competition up in here. That's called the self-place. Our self is to our memes what our body is to our genes. And so the idea is that universal Darwinism proposes that thought itself is the result of differential reproduction and survival. What place is there for free will or for a human soul? So to summarize, universal Darwinism is a scientific paradigm that eliminates teleology in life, keep going, in ethics, for sociobiology, in the cosmos, and in the mind. Now, these things have not been proven, but I'm pointing them out to you to emphasize what the power is of the idea. I think there is a genuine theological challenge here for all faiths. My invitation for you here is to take up this challenge and intellectually wrestle with it. Thank you.
The next talk is by Professor Bhaktivedanta. He is a professor in biochemistry and biochemistry at the University of Arkansas in the USA, and author of the book In Search of Divine Reality, Science is the Source of Inspiration. Professor Bhaktivedanta.
I would like to make an announcement first. I have about 50 copies of the combined lectures, and they're all gone. Many people wanted to have a copy. If you write your address on a piece of paper, give it to me, I will send it to you. I prefer email, but I'll send it also by mail. I also have una traduzione italiana. If you want that, please write it on there. Okay. So you must be at home. Sometimes people come to me and say, your book is difficult to read. And then I say, well, for all people who have trouble to read English, I recommend Russian translation. Really, there are other opportunities as far as that goes. There's a Portuguese edition and Italiano, there's a German tedesco. Actually, it's wonderful blue. So, earlier I made one general remark at the beginning, and I have another one that I'd like to make, and that is science cannot be part of an agenda. That is also often forgotten. example, many people think when we can explain nature in a natural way, that's a good reason to be atheist. But it is not really. Then, if the universe is mind-like, one does not have to subscribe to a particular creed or any creed. Physics is no longer in conflict with the assumption of universal mind. It may even suggest the existence of such a mind. It will not tell us what to call it or how to worship it, or that we do have to worship it. So the message is really that everybody must make his or her own decision. There's a general framework into which everyone can bring their own experiences. Now, for this section, I have selected topics showing some similarities between the vision of evolution of Theravada, French paleontologist and Jesuit priest, and some aspects of quantum reality. During the first half of the 20th century, Theravada developed a theory of evolution which had no basis in the science of his time. The science of his time was the outgoing mechanism, materialism of Newtonian physics. Everything could be explained in terms of moving particles, material particles that obey Newton's laws. So he had no basis there, but in contrast, it is like he has a home in quantum reality. In Teilhard's vision, the process of evolution is essentially the evolution of a spiritual sphere, the noosphere, as he said. An element of consciousness is active at all levels of reality. The mental enters the material world in a natural way. Visible order is built on the principles of a transcendent order. And it is believed ultimate reality exists outside of space and time. With the advent of humanity, the evolution therefore has revealed itself of a process of expansion of consciousness. In human beings, evolution has become conscious of itself and is attracted by a focal point of divine spirit, which he called point omega, in which the consciousness of humanity will merge with the consciousness that he saw active in the universe, the cosmic Christ. It is part of this view that life is not a fortuitous accident of terrestrial matter, but a specific effect of matter turned complex, a property that is present in the entire cosmic stuff. So he writes, life in the universe cannot be considered anymore as a merely unimportant accident, but must be considered as something that is present everywhere and under strong internal pressure, ready to well up from even the smallest crack at every which spot in the universe. When the goal of life is to develop consciousness, that which comes out of every crack in the universe ultimately is mind. In quantum reality, it is possible to suggest that the backbone of the universe is mind-like. In Teilhard's vision, the mind represents an indestructible portion of the universe. Below a certain complexity, matter seems dead. However, Teilhard says, matter never is really dead, but we should call it free-light. In agreement with this thesis, he considered that matter and consciousness were not two substances or two different modes of existence, but two aspects of the same cosmic stuff. There is no doubt, he wrote, the so-called root matter is certainly animated in its own way. Atoms, electrons, molecules, whatever they may be, if there be
before on this planet the physical chemical conditions allowed the birth of organic life, the universe was either not yet anything in itself, or it had already formed a nebula of consciousness. In a Newtonian universe, such statements would be nonsense. In the world of quantum entities, we know that elementary particles are active. They constantly explore their quantum state in quantum terms. Their actions are spontaneous, and they are able to respond to mental principles like information, instructions from probability waves, and so on. Thus, they are not really dead, but they exhibit some properties which are among those that are vital to living organisms. You have to be careful not to get terribly unequal. I should not show this to you. Sometimes we get tempted to get poetic. The incessant jumping of quantum stuff in and out of reality sometimes appears to be like a prompt on a computer monitor which says some consciousness is online. Quote that. Mind-like properties of elementary particles are rudimentary. So we talked about this earlier today. Professor Sarwanti didn't like hierarchy, but I do see a difference in systems that react to information in a mere automatic and mechanical way to vegetative intelligence systems which use information in an organized way, and then to the level of self-conscious beings that are able to understand abstract values, universal values, and spiritual values. So the importance is that the emergence of consciousness in the universe is not from nothing, but on a rudimentary base that has elements of consciousness in a mechanical way. In the quantum perspective of life, I consider intelligent systems as integrations of groups of states, which form substates of the quantum structure of the universe. Each of them integrates over the larger subspace. Since reality is ultimately mind-like, it is not amazing that as they are proposed, the process will lead to beings with enhanced mental state, mental abilities. So if you draw it to an extreme, you can think that every one of us is the actualization of a group of quantum states. Those states existed before we were born, and they will exist after we get it. The power of consciousness is particularly evident in cultural evolution, whereas they arise a certain special influence that of the psyche, which so far has been negligible for the concerns of the systematic, all of a sudden plays a leading role in the branching of development. Because of this force, an increasingly dense and energized atmosphere is forming on this planet of creative and inventive endeavors and efforts, like a dense skin which becomes formidably irresistible from that moment on. When a powerful vortex grips it and forces it to focus in order to attack the wheel like an arrow in a single concerted direction with the purpose not only to gain a higher level of pleasure or knowledge, but a higher level of being. Why does mankind brace itself onto itself in order to find? And what do they want to find if not ultimately the means to super or ultra-harmonize? A concerted research effort is now focused on a very intelligent engineering, stem cell research, and cloning. If the universe were nothing but a giant heap of mass, the process of enhancing mental powers of mankind would be aimless. In a mind-like reality, expanding the spiritual human power seems a natural thing to do. Various physicists have suggested that ultimate reality, the processes of ultimate reality, lie outside of space-time. A reality whose nature is that of a wholeness, is comparable to the point without separate parts, without extended space and without extended time. In a reality that is a whole, each location is everywhere, each time is always. Theos point omega is such a reality. Strictly speaking, he wrote, point omega is placed outside of the empirical process which it brings to its conclusion. In order to reach it, you will have to leave space and time. In our current existence, it is difficult to comprehend how we can be part of a reality which is an indivisible wholeness without parts and divisions, and how we can be separated at the same time from our environment and from each other. In fact, necessity for survival for each living being is to grow mentally. An answer can perhaps be found in the mind-like nature of reality. It is not the material cortex of reality that is an undivided whole, but its mind-like basis. It is only with our minds that we can partake of the non-local reality of the universe. In the singular point of convergence of matter, if point omega is really the keystone in the vault of the noosphere, then it can be understood only as that point in which the universe, having reached the limits of its centralization, needs another, even more unfathomable center, the center that exists out of itself, an absolutely final principle of irreversibility and personalization, the only true omega. And it is at this point, if I'm not totally misled, that the question of God emerges for the science of evolution. God as the driving force, the collection point, and the guarantor. In this way, they are tempted to achieve a natural union of science and theology, and he hoped it might be the science of the future. We are also witnessing a convergence of Western and Eastern thought. In the tradition of Indian spirituality, life does not come from the process of evolution, but life comes from life. Quoting the title of the book by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. In the words of Yad Shrivastava, I should please cover this. Life is arising in the soul and not in the body. Darwin has not found a mechanism for the evolution of life by bodies. So, in view of the mind-like aspects of quantum reality, it is possible to think that the mental element is the power of the universe. Logos, mind, moves, baptized. Different cultures, different people at different times found a different name for the same phenomenon. By creating human minds that has found a new way to burst onto the scene. Will the species that follow us share the same values? It seems safe to propose only those of our values will survive, which are in agreement with the principles of universal consciousness. For example, it would be difficult to convince generations that grow up on another planet or the artificial satellite station that the whole universe was created in 6 or 7 Earth days. So perhaps this is a chance to define a basis for morality. Virtue is striving for a life that is in harmony with the order of the universe. If the universe is mind-like, it can be expected to have a spiritual order as well as a physical order. And in human beings, this order rises to the level of morality. the way down to the microscopic structure of its proteins, it bears the traces, if not the stigmata of his ancestry. If he accepts the message of science in its full significance, man must at last wake out of his millinery dream and discover his total solitude, his fundamental isolation. He must realize that, like a gypsy, he lives on the boundary of an alien world, a world that is deaf to his music and as indifferent to his hopes as to his suffering or his crimes. Wow. My proposal is, yes, we need covenants with nature, but not because we are descendants of enemies, rather because of the need of the mind to be in touch with what is akin to it in nature, the mind-like background of the universe. If the universe is a network of instantaneous long-distance connections, it is more likely that it will include us than that it does not. If it is mind-like, it is more likely that it will communicate with our minds than that it does not. This is the new covenant of nature. According to St. Augustine, all knowledge is a gift of grace. If you don't believe, you don't understand. Translated out of Christian context, it means the human mind is not self-contained and not self-sustaining. We are on life to a transcendent part of reality. Teilhard de Chardin was an inspired man. He managed to create a union of some of the essential aspects of quantum reality before they were known with his faith. As to myself, I dare to modify famous saying by Immanuel Kant. I have his permission. If not, we should have said it right at the beginning. Two things fill my mind with ever-increasing admiration and reverence the more I think about them. The miracle of my consciousness in its covenant with the mind-like background of physical reality. Gracias.
Before I continue, I would like to make an announcement from Bhaktivedanta to all our Congress speakers. In order to get the maximum benefit of the presence of so